An ex-player claims Chelsea paid for his silence over abuse. The club admit it paid Gary Johnson thousands of pounds, but said it was compensation, not hush money. Also this lunchtime, we're back. The Lib Dems celebrate victory over Zach Goldsmith in the Richmond by-election.
What we've shown here is that people feel extremely strongly about Brexit and the current government's approach to it, strongly enough to overturn a huge Tory majority in this seat.
Rail fares go up again. One union calls it a kick in the teeth for passengers and...
I know nothing.
Manuel bids a final farewell. Tributes to the actor Andrew Sachs.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Charlene White.
Good afternoon. The Premier League leaders, Chelsea, have confirmed to ITV News they did make a payout to a former player who claims he was sexually abused by a scout at the club. Chelsea say it was compensation, though, not hush money. Gary Johnson has gone public today, telling the Daily Mirror he received £50,000 last year after approaching the club about abuse in the 1970s. His abuser, Eddie Heath, has since died. Nick Wallace has the latest.
A Chelsea boy through and through. This is Gary Johnson in his professional heyday, a product of the Chelsea youth system, where from the age of 13 for 3 years he was sexually assaulted by this man, Eddie Heath, the club's chief scout, who's now dead.
It was a culture back then that I think it's just going to be an epidemic.
Mr Johnson has given an interview to the Daily Mirror because Chelsea Football Club have lifted the confidentiality agreement he was made to sign last year, when he was given £50,000 compensation by the club for the abuse he suffered. He's still angry about it.
For them to pay the money that they paid with an order tells you that, you know, they really didn't want to admit or help myself for fear of being exposed.
Gary Johnson says he knows of 3 other players who were abused by Eddie Heath. But when he went to the police and the Professional Footballers Association for help, he got nowhere.
You bury it again and it comes back again. You know, I was just looking for a little help along the way. You know, I didn't know what to expect.
Chelsea today wouldn't say anything about the allegations.
We did make a statement the other day in which we stated that we were holding our own investigation into the matter, into the case, and when that investigation is complete, we will pass all information over to the FA as part of their wider investigation. And until such time as the investigation is complete and we hand the information over to the FA so they can have a look at everything we have, and the way that the club acted, we're not going to make any further comment on the matter.
Mr Johnson hopes more victims of abuse will come forward. Nick Wallace, ITV News.
Well, this is a story that is continuing to develop this lunchtime. The last hour, West Midlands Police have confirmed they are investigating 4 historical allegations of child sexual abuse in football. Well, Richard Scorer is from the law firm Slater Gordon. They were involved in Gary Johnson's case at Chelsea. He joins me now from Salford. Richard, now I know you can't talk about the specifics of this case, but can you tell us about how common it is for compensation clauses in these kinds of things?
Well, let me say, I think these kinds of gagging clauses are wrong. They shouldn't be allowed, but of course they are lawful. And what you see happening is victims being put in a very invidious position where they're told, well, you can take a settlement, but you've got to have a gagging clause with it, or, you know, we'll deny the abuse and we'll fight you in a legal battle that could go on for 3 or 4 years and might be very draining and stressful. So these are the sort of invidious choices that victims are faced with. We don't know exactly how common these sorts of agreements are. I certainly know that a number of years ago the Catholic Church used to try to use them quite a lot to cover up allegations of abuse. I think they're wrong. I think we need to move to a culture of openness about abuse, and most of all, a culture where allegations are reported to the police and are properly investigated.
I mean, have you been contacted by any other players in recent weeks?
Well, we've certainly had calls in from other people who are talking about abuse that they've suffered in football and indeed other sports. I think this is an issue which is not just limited to football. I think we will see this emerging in other sports as well, because you have the same sorts of issues that lead to abuse happening. So, yes, I mean, it's a big issue across sport. We need to address it, and I think the sensible way to address it is to get a culture of openness so that allegations are reported and investigated properly.
Well, in that spirit of openness, is it common for football authorities or sporting authorities, full stop, not to be told about this and for a club to keep it to themselves?
Well, the difficulty we have in this country is we don't have what's called a mandatory reporting law. So we don't have a law that says that if you're an organisation, if you know about abuse or you suspect abuse, that you then have a legal duty to report that and have it properly investigated. And that's what we need. We need a mandatory reporting law that forces organisations, if they know about abuse like this, to say, we've got to report this, we've got to have something done about it, we've got to have it investigated.
Of course. Well, Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, our sports correspondent Ian Payne joins us from Stamford Bridge now. And Ian, you've been listening there to what the lawyer had to say. How serious is this for Chelsea?
Well, on the face of it, Charlene, it's very serious indeed. The main problem for Chelsea is that when they heard about the original allegations, they're duty-bound to tell the Football Association and the police about the allegations. And it appears that they didn't do that at the time, and rather they went ahead with this agreement between the two parties. Now, my understanding is that Chelsea are not going to dispute making this payment, but they will argue that it is compensation for what may or may not have happened, rather than hush money. The club say they were advised by their legal team at the time that the payment was appropriate, and they decided on Tuesday night of this week, however, that it would be better for them to waive the confidentiality of Mr. Johnson, and that's why he's done it. But if they didn't tell the FA, they could be in serious trouble, maybe even a points deduction. OK, thank you very much, Ian. After all the political shocks of 2017, it's perhaps no surprise that we've had another one. Today, the Liberal Democrats are celebrating after overturning a huge Conservative majority of 23,000 points in Richmond Park. It had been triggered after Zac Goldsmith resigned from the Tories over the decision to build a third runway at Heathrow. He'd hoped to win back his seat over the issue, but the victor, Sarah Olney, convinced people to vote for her by promising to campaign for a softer exit from the European Union. Sajal Karia has the details now on how Richmond Park took a stand against Brexit.
Liberal Democrats, 20,000.
The beaming smile said it all. Sarah Olney, a political newcomer who's chalked up another shock victory in a year of political upsets, beating the incumbent, Zac Goldsmith. She fought the campaign on the issue of Brexit, now becoming the Lib Dems' only female MP.
The people of Richmond Park and North Kingston have sent a shockwave through this Conservative Brexit government, and our message is clear. We do not want a hard Brexit. We do not want to be pulled out of the single market, and we will not let intolerance, division and fear win. Thank you very much.
Zac Goldsmith, a staunch Brexiteer, looked deflated. He'd kept his promise, quit the Tories in protest at Heathrow expansion, standing as an independent. But it was June's EU referendum that dominated this by-election.
This by-election that we've just had was not a political calculation. It was a promise that I made, and it was a promise that I kept.
It's a good morning. Start of many more.
The Lib Dem leader, Tim Farron, couldn't have been prouder to show off his newest MP, who's become his 9th after the party's 2015 general election disaster.
Is the Prime Minister really going to listen to you when you've still only got 9 MPs?
It's about listening to the electorate. Now, what's happened at the moment is that the Tory party's main opposition has come for its own right flank. What the Liberal Democrats have shown is that out in the country, that we have the ability to form that kind of moderate, progressive opposition.
Mr Farron may have had a bounce in his step, but the Tories were clear. The country voted leave, and they will press on with Brexit regardless.
This result occurred in one of the most pro-Remain parts of the United Kingdom. The Liberal Democrats secured fewer than half of the votes overall cast. So while for Sarah Olney, I wish her well in the future, I think it would be a mistake for her or for anyone else to interpret this as any sort of mandate to frustrate the will of the British people.
What this result does show is that the UK split with Europe is as wide and deep as ever. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
Well, our political correspondent Paul Brand is in Richmond for us this lunchtime. And Paul, Richmond is very much on the Remain side and Zac Goldsmith was very much a Leave campaigner. So was the result that much of a surprise?
Well, Charlene, I think if the Lib Dems were to pick anywhere in the country right now to have a by-election, they would probably choose Richmond. So in that sense, it's not a huge surprise. You know, this is a wealthy constituency. Lots of people here work in the City of London. 70% voted to remain. But they have overturned a 23,000 majority here. Zac Goldsmith was a very well-known candidate. He stood for Mayor of London. He's pretty popular as an MP here too. So in that sense, it is a real coup. And I think what the Lib Dems have managed to do is carve out this new identity as the unashamedly pro-EU party, trying to tap into those votes among the not insubstantial 48% of people who voted Remain. And we often talk about Brexit as being this revolt against the Liberal elite. Well, here I think the Liberal elite have sort of fought back a bit. Now, we don't overstate this. The Lib Dems have only got up to 9 MPs. After all, one extra MP won't necessarily change the course of Brexit, but perhaps it might just sort of soften the edge of that hard Brexit and show Theresa May the political risk of pulling out too hard, too fast.
Right, Paul, thanks very much. Train fares are on the up again. They'll be rising by an average of 2.3% from January. The rise will cover both season tickets and off-peak leisure tickets. Well, let's talk to our consumer editor, Chris Troy. Chris, how significant is this rise?
Well, I'll tell you what, if you ask that question of some of the passengers around here, you'd have some pretty unbroadcastable replies. I think there will be financial pain. Let me take you through some of the detail of these latest rises. On average, rail fares will rise 2.3%. That's double last year's rise, but some passengers face much bigger increases than that. London-Newcastle anytime return goes up 5% to £292. A similar ticket between Birmingham and Edinburgh rises 3.9% to £224.70. Well, I'm joined now by the rail industry's main spokesperson on all of this, Jacqueline Starr. Jacqueline, thanks for joining us. How do you defend these increases when we don't see any improvement in services?
So government significantly influence the fares increase. They regulate those fares, and so that's the responsibility of government. They also influence the fares that they don't regulate, because train operating companies next year will pay £1.2 billion worth of contributions back to government, and those fare increases are necessary to drive the improvements across the industry.
But you keep mentioning improvements, but all people seem to get for all this extra money is more and more excuses. And even according to official figures, performance standards are not reaching targets. How can you justify this?
The number of performance failures is actually reducing. The challenge is that when they do happen, that they're more significant because we have higher capacity of passengers within the rail network. There's £50 billion worth of modernisation programme going into the industry. For example, that's £5,500 new carriages, the tune of £11.6 billion.
Jacqueline Starr, thank you very much indeed. Well, of course, many passengers are angry about train delays. One thing always comes on time, and that is the fare increases at this time of year. In fact, starting on January the 2nd.
All right, Chris, thanks very much. The actor Andrew Sachs, most famous for playing hapless Spanish waiter Manuel in Fawlty Towers, has died aged 86. He'd been living with dementia for the past 4 years. John Cleese, who starred alongside him in the show, described him as a sweet gentleman. We'll be talking to Andrew's son John about his memories of his father in just a sec. But first, Paul Davis looks back at the career of one of the country's most talented comedians.
Manuel, let me explain.
British television has produced few characters as memorable or as loved as Andrew Sachs' hapless waiter, Manuel. The confused clashes with Basil Fawlty and the catchphrases, now revered as comedy gold.
I know nothing. What? I know nothing. No. Nothing. No, forget that.
Ironically, Sachs wasn't sure he could master a Spanish accent and originally asked producers if the waiter could be German.
Oh. No, I know nothing. I am from Barcelona.
Sachs was born in Berlin in 1930. His Jewish family fled to Britain to escape persecution. In 1975, after parts on stage, he landed the role that would define his career. Apparently unaware of his own popularity, he later admitted he wasn't sure John Cleese would keep him on after the first series.
You predictable! You continental cretin! I'm sorry, I'll get you another one. Then out row. Tonto!
This is how he summed up the appeal of Manuel.
We always love seeing people in trouble, unless it's us, you know. We can actually see it, enjoy the man falling on the banana skin rather than being the man on the banana skin.
After Fawlty Towers, there was an appearance in Coronation Street and radio work. He was also unwittingly caught up in another broadcast drama. Comedian Russell Brand forced to resign from the BBC after leaving lewd messages on Sachs' answer phone relating to his granddaughter. Andrew Sachs was diagnosed with dementia in 2012. He continued to work, though his place in British comedy folklore was already guaranteed.
Well, John Sachs, Andrew's son, joins me now. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to us. Now, I've been looking at some of the tributes that people have made to your father, and they've talked of his comedy genius, his kindness, his warmth. But how do you remember him?
Well, just as a father, really. I mean, I remember the first time I went on the set of Fawlty Towers and I saw this rather large, gangly man with my father under his arms running across the set and banging his head against the wall and then whacking him with a spoon and a saucepan. And it was a little confusing at the time, but, you know, we grew to love it.
And did you grow with the fact that your father was just an absolute legend to so many people?
At the time, you didn't quite digest it because we didn't know if it was going to be successful. It was on BBC Two, not many viewers at that time, and you didn't really think about that. But I think when he sort of went on to Series 2 and got a BAFTA and stuff, you thought, hang on, this has got legs. And here we are 41 years later and it's still looking good.
Oh, it definitely is. And looking at those clips then does certainly bring back memories of watching it. But we were talking earlier about your daughter, who perhaps is a whole different generation, didn't necessarily realise what a legend her grandfather was. And it's a whole new generation that are now able to learn that.
I know, it is difficult because it's almost to them, it's like me watching an old 8mm of Charlie Chaplin or Laurel and Hardy.
True.
And, you know, it still works, and it's comedy in its finest. And there was a lot of similarity to what Manuel was. He was a physical character, so that's why John underwrote it. You didn't need too many words, you just need the odd K, but it was a very physical performance. And so, yeah, that's my comparison, yeah.
And what has it been like, though, for the family to be also living with dementia for the last 4 years?
Yeah, my mother had a hard time, you know. It's taken a lot out of her.
And so what, I mean, has it just been quite difficult for all of you, though, to sort of see the person that he became?
But you know, particularly for my mother, because she's lived it every day. So it's taken its toll.
Now, let's go back to talking about your father's work. What would you say is your favourite?
You know, a body of work. I loved him in the theatre. I liked his early stuff with Brian Rix and Ray Cooney, all the old farces they used to do at Whitehall. They were great. They was the same stuff, slapstick stuff. He did No Sex, Please, We're British. And that was physical, because there's a scene where you jump through a counter and do a roll, and you had to do that every day. And he followed David Jason with that, and they were very athletic, those guys, you know, they're pretty physical.
Well, yeah, if there's one thing your dad was, very athletic and very physical and incredibly funny.
Yeah.
John, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us about him. Now, in the past few minutes, Formula One world champion Nico Rosberg has announced his surprise retirement. The German won his first world title on Sunday in Abu Dhabi, beating Mercedes teammate Lewis Hamilton. In a Facebook post, he says, "I climbed my mountain, I'm on the peak, so this feels right." Right, let's move on now. And there are warnings today about just how safe your debit and credit card details actually are. Experts say it's too easy for criminals to work out your card number, expiry date and security code with simply a laptop and the internet. They say it takes just 6 seconds. The research was done by Newcastle University and Mohammed Amir Ali worked on it, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for talking to us. I thought the CVV number that we have on the cards, I thought that was supposed to make them incredibly safe. Is that not the case then?
Exactly. All the banks and the payment industry believes that CVV is the most crucial element of a payment card. In fact, we do have an industrial standard which strictly says that nobody, not even the card issuing banks, can store the CVV.
But I was having a look into this, and actually Visa have said that you've claimed that this is just within Visa debit cards and credit cards, but they claim there's a whole other layer that they have in terms of protecting people from fraud. So do you think those layers just simply aren't working?
Exactly. Visa takes security very seriously. But with the attack we found, and in the paper, we practically demonstrated that an attacker, if wants, could be able to bypass all that security features and still would be able to make transactions. And we were able to make money transfer overseas, and in our experiments, we did small payments to India. So we have achieved bypassing the security features as well.
Now, I know that a lot of websites are now allowing you to pay using your fingerprint, usually your thumbprint. Do you think that extra layer could actually be the answer to trying to stop so many fraudulent payments?
Exactly. There are systems which verifies, which authenticates a user. A perfect example is 3D Secure. 3D Secure, what it does is it authenticates a user based on the password.
Yeah.
What happens is there are more group of websites which just use your credit card information.
Of course.
They don't require any password or any fingerprints. So
OK. Well, sorry, Mohammed. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we do now have to go. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
OK, finally, an update on a story we told you about last week. Oldham Council, undeterred by the national uproar caused by Boaty McBoatface, bravely asked local school children to help name new road gritter. After being swamped with suggestions, the council has finally revealed the winning name. It's Nicole Salt Slinger. I'm sure the X Factor judge will be thrilled. Right, that's it from us this lunchtime. I'll be back later with Alistair Stewart for the ITV Evening News at 6:30. But from everyone here on the Lunchtime team, enjoy your afternoon. Goodbye.